The roar of the crowd was deafening. It shook the walls of the Xiphos Prime Coliseum, vibrating through the floor, rattling the bones of every fighter waiting in the tunnels beneath the arena. The atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation. The Galactic Combat Championship was the greatest spectacle in the known universe, a blood sport watched by trillions across thousands of systems. It was an event where the strongest warriors of every species came to prove themselves. And this year, everything had changed. No weapons. For the first time in the history of the championship, the Galactic Council had banned all weaponry from the arena. No plasma blades, no sonic disruptors, no gravhammers. No molecular shredders, no energy lances, no void-forged gauntlets. The decree had been met with outrage from many warrior species. The Yulthari, whose entire combat style revolved around their psionic glaives, had boycotted the tournament entirely. The Var-Rik, whose exoskeletal blades could slice through neutronium, had withdrawn in protest. Even the mighty Othrans, known for their neutron flails, had nearly abandoned the championship. But the council had stood firm. True strength is not in one's weapons, but in one's body. Fight as nature intended. Most species scoffed at the idea. Some relied entirely on their technology, their cybernetic enhancements, or their genetic modifications. Others still had natural weapons, razor-sharp claws, bone spikes, venomous fangs. And then there were the humans. A relatively new addition to the galactic community, humanity had spent the last 50 years clawing its way into relevance. Most other species viewed them as fragile, weak creatures, too soft, too slow, too breakable to ever be real contenders in a fight. They lacked natural armor, had no claws, no fangs, no venom sacs or psychic abilities. Their biology was unremarkable. Their muscles were dense, yes, but nothing compared to the powerhouse species like the Tavarak or the Brachari. Without weapons, what could a human possibly do? That was the question on everyone's minds as Sergeant Marcus Ironhand Hayes stepped into the competitor's tunnel, rolling his shoulders, stretching his arms, cracking his knuckles. He was alone. The only human who had entered the tournament. The only one foolish or crazy enough to sign up for a championship against some of the deadliest beings in the galaxy with nothing but his fists. The tunnel was filled with other fighters, each species towering over him. To his left, a towering Brachari, a six-limbed brute covered in thick armor plates, its four arms flexing in anticipation. To his right, a Zenther, a long, insectoid warrior with bladed limbs that had been forced to file down to comply with the no-weapons rule. The others eyed Marcus with something between amusement and pity. A massive, reptilian Tavarak warrior turned toward him, its scaly hide rippling with muscle. It clicked its mandibles in what passed for laughter. "You do not belong here, human." The alien's voice was a low, rumbling growl. "This is a stage for warriors, not soft-fleshed prey." Marcus smirked. "Funny. I was just thinking the same thing." The Tavarak let out a deep, chuffing sound, clearly entertained. "You will be torn apart, human. Do you even have weapons hidden inside you?" It pointed a clawed finger at him. "No fangs. No claws. No armor. No venom. Nothing." Marcus cracked his neck and rolled his shoulders. "I've got these." He lifted his fists. "That's all I need." The aliens around him broke into laughter, chittering, growling, clicking sounds filling the tunnel. Marcus didn't laugh. He just smiled. Because he knew something they didn't. The first match was about to begin. The Xiphos Prime Coliseum was a masterpiece of alien architecture, a massive dome, large enough to house over 100,000 spectators. Its floor was an expanse of shimmering black obsidian, polished to a mirror sheen. Floating holodrones hovered above the battlefield, broadcasting the fights to every corner of the galaxy. The rules were simple. Fighters were randomly selected for one-on-one combat. Win and you advance. Lose, and you're eliminated. Marcus' name appeared on the display. Sergeant Marcus Hayes, human, versus Gorrvek, Brachari. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The Brachari were war beasts, 9 feet tall, built like walking fortresses, with 4 massive arms and dense, armored hides. Gorvek stepped forward, rolling his shoulders, his plated exoskeleton clicking as he moved. Marcus just smiled and stepped onto the obsidian floor. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena. "Begin." Gorvek didn't waste a second. He charged, all four fists raised. He was a battering ram, a living wrecking ball, moving with terrifying speed for something so large. Marcus didn't move. He just watched. The Brachiary swung. A hammer blow meant to end the fight in a single strike. At the last moment, Marcus twisted. The massive fist slammed into the ground where he had stood, cracking the obsidian tile. Gorvek barely had time to react before Marcus moved. A step forward. A pivot. A strike. Fast and precise. Marcus' fist drove into the Brachiary's side, right between the armor plates. A liver shot. Gorvek stumbled. Marcus didn't stop. A hook to the jaw. A body shot to the ribs. Another blow to the side. The Brachiary swung wildly, but Marcus was too fast. He ducked, weaved, sidestepped every attack. To the crowd, it looked impossible, an unarmored human slipping past a war beast's every strike. And then, with a final perfectly timed right hook, Marcus dropped the alien. The Brachiary hit the ground with a thud. Silence. For a moment, the entire arena was dead quiet. And then, the crowd erupted. A human had won. With no weapons. With just his hands. As Marcus walked back toward the tunnel, he felt a shift. The way the other fighters looked at him, it had changed. Before, they had laughed. Now they stared. Not with amusement. With fear. Because they realized something terrifying. Humans didn't need weapons. They were weapons. And in the shadows of the tunnel, a voice whispered, This changes everything." The silence in the waiting tunnel was heavy, a thick, oppressive thing that clung to the air. The laughter, the mocking amusement from before, was gone. Now, the alien warriors who had dismissed Marcus as a fragile, soft-bodied joke were staring at him with something new. Warriors from species that had dominated the tournament for centuries, the Tavarak, the Brachiary, the Slurgeon, stood in tense, quiet contemplation. Even the insectoid Zenther, who rarely showed emotion, chittered amongst themselves in what could only be unease. Marcus felt the weight of their stares but ignored them. He rotated his shoulder, stretching the muscles that still hummed with adrenaline. The first fight had gone exactly as he expected. Fast, brutal, and efficient. But this was only the beginning. The tournament schedule moved quickly. The fights were randomized, and the next matchups would be decided in minutes. Fighters barely had time to recover before their names appeared on the holodisplay. Marcus stood with his arms crossed, waiting. The moment his name popped up, he exhaled slowly. Sergeant Marcus Hayes, human, versus Durazkor, Tavarak. A murmur ran through the waiting area. Drazkor was a monster. The Tavarak species had evolved in one of the deadliest ecosystems in the known galaxy. They were massive reptilian brutes, standing over 8 feet tall, with dense muscle packed onto their frames. Their scaled skin was thick enough to turn away energy weapons, their 3-clawed hands capable of crushing reinforced steel. Even without weapons, Drazkor was still one of the most feared competitors in the tournament. He had taken down his last opponent, a heavily armored Slurgeon, in under 30 seconds. Now, it was his turn to face the human. And judging by the slow, predatory grin spreading across his face, he was looking forward to it. Marcus just cracked his knuckles and rolled his neck. This would be fun. The crowd inside the Colosseum was louder than before. The shock of Marcus' first victory had turned into hype. Now, the audience was eager. Curious. They wanted to see if it had been a fluke. Or if the human was really that dangerous. Drazkor stepped onto the battlefield, rolling his shoulders, his scaled hide gleaming under the arena lights. He let out a low, rumbling growl that sent vibrations through the floor. Marcus simply grinned and raised his fists. The announcer's voice thundered. "Begin." Drazkor moved like a hurricane. One moment he was standing still, the next, he was a blur, charging across the battlefield with terrifying speed for his size. His 3-clawed hands curled into fists, each one large enough to engulf a human skull. He swung. Marcus ducked. The fist whistled over his head, slicing through the air like a cannonball. Drazkor adjusted instantly, spinning on his heel, swinging again. His follow-up strike was a downward hammer blow meant to crush Marcus into the obsidian floor. Marcus sidestepped. The ground shattered where Drazkor's fist landed, crack spiderwebbing outward in all directions. The Tavarak warrior growled, twisting to attack again, but this time Marcus struck first. One step in. A sharp pivot. A perfectly placed punch to the ribs. A normal strike wouldn't have done much against the Tavarak's dense hide. But Marcus knew exactly where to hit. He aimed just beneath the floating ribs, where the scales were weakest. His knuckles smashed into the soft spot with a thump, forcing air from Drazkor's lungs. The alien warrior stumbled. Marcus didn't give him time to recover. Another shot. Then another. He moved like a ghost, slipping past Drazkor's massive fists, delivering surgical strikes, blows that weren't just powerful, but precise. A liver shot. A sharp jab to the solar plexus. A right hook to the jaw. Drazkor staggered. The arena went dead silent. The Tavarak warrior should not be losing. Not like this. Not to a human. Drazkor bellowed in rage and lunged, swinging wildly. And that's when Marcus ended it. He dodged under the strike, planted his foot, and twisted his entire body into a single, devastating uppercut. His fist connected with Drazkor's jaw with a sickening crunch. The reptilian brute's eyes rolled back. His massive body wavered, then collapsed like a felled tree. Silence. The entire Colosseum sat in stunned shock. Then, all at once, the crowd erupted. It was louder than before. Hysteria. Disbelief. Excitement. The human had done it again. Without weapons. With nothing but his hands. Back in the waiting tunnels, Marcus took a deep breath, shaking the tension from his arms. He could feel it now, the shift. The way the other fighters looked at him. Before, they had seen him as a joke. A soft-bodied nobody. No. They weren't laughing anymore. Even the deadliest warriors in the tournament, the Brachiari, the Slurgeon, the Zenther, were quiet. Because they understood now. They had underestimated humans. They had assumed that because humanity lacked claws, fangs, or armor, they lacked the ability to fight. But what they hadn't realized, what no alien species had ever considered, was that humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years. They had perfected the art of combat. Without weapons. Without enhancements. Just flesh and bone. And that made them terrifying. As Marcus sat on the bench, stretching his arms, he felt someone watching him. A presence. He turned his head. A figure stood in the shadows, half hidden in the dim light of the waiting tunnel. A tall, wiry alien with deep purple skin and 4 glowing eyes. A Carivian. Marcus narrowed his eyes. The Carivians weren't warriors. They were tacticians, manipulators, spies. They never entered the championship themselves, but they always watched. The Carivian tilted its head slightly. And then, in a voice smooth as silk, it spoke. "You are changing the game, human." Marcus exhaled slowly, rubbing his knuckles. "I do that sometimes." The Carivian smiled, showing sharp, needle-like teeth. "Good," it murmured. "Because now, they're going to try to kill you." And then it vanished back into the shadows. Marcus sat still, letting the words sink in. He knew the Carivian was right. The other fighters weren't going to hold back anymore. They were afraid now. And when warriors got afraid, they got desperate. The crowd's roar had changed. It wasn't just excitement anymore. It was something deeper, something primal. The kind of noise that didn't just signal entertainment, but the birth of something new. They had come expecting another routine championship, another display of alien dominance, another predictable tournament. But now they were watching something impossible. A human, a species thought to be weak, fragile, utterly outmatched, had taken down 2 of the most feared warriors in the tournament. And he had done it with nothing but his bare hands. The energy inside the Xiphos Prime Colosseum had shifted. The audience wasn't just watching anymore. They were witnessing history. And now, the real test was about to begin. Marcus sat on the bench in the waiting tunnel, rubbing his knuckles. His last fight with Drazkor had been tougher than the first. He could still feel the ache in his ribs from when the Tavarak had managed to clip him. Just a glancing blow, but enough to remind him that he wasn't untouchable. Not yet. Around him, the other fighters remained quiet. Their eyes held no amusement anymore. Only calculation. The next round was about to begin. And this time, Marcus knew they wouldn't be holding back. The holo display flickered. Names shuffled. Faces flashed. And then, his opponent was revealed. Sergeant Marcus Hayes, human, versus Vorka are the unbroken, Slurgeon. The room tensed. Someone hissed. Vorkar was a nightmare. The Slurgeons were a species of biomechanical horrors, massive, shifting creatures made of interlocking obsidian plates, their bodies reinforced by living metal. They didn't have flesh. They didn't have organs like most species. They were walking fortresses. And Vorkar, he was their champion. He had never been defeated. Never fallen in combat. Never bled. Marcus exhaled through his nose, shaking out his arms. His body ached, but he didn't care. This was just another fight. Another problem to solve. The Colosseum felt different this time. The excitement had an edge to it now, like the audience was watching something that shouldn't be happening. Marcus stepped onto the battlefield, rolling his shoulders. Vorkar stood across from him, towering over him at nearly 10 feet tall. His body shifted, plates grinding together like moving armor. His eyes, 6 glowing slits of crimson light, watched Marcus with cold, mechanical calculation. No emotion. No anger. Just analysis. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena. Begin. Vorkar didn't charge like the others. He waited. He knew. He had studied Marcus' fights. The Brockari had rushed him and been picked apart. The Tavarak had relied on brute force and been outmaneuvered. Vorkar wasn't going to make the same mistake. Marcus exhaled slowly. All right. Fine. He attacked first. He launched forward, fast, low, aiming for an opening between Vorkar's shifting armor plates. The moment his fist made contact. Crack. Marcus barely dodged as a blade shot out of Vorkar's forearm, slicing the air where his ribs had been a second ago. The crowd gasped. Marcus staggered back, eyes narrowing. The no-weapons rule had forced most fighters to change their strategies. But Vorkar, his body was a weapon. And the council hadn't banned that. Shit. The Slurgeon warrior lunged. Marcus dodged left, then immediately rolled as a second blade erupted from Vorkar's knee, slicing downward like a guillotine. The bastard was adapting. And he was fast. Too fast. Marcus barely avoided the next strike. Vorkar's arm shifted mid-swing, plates rearranging to form a hammer-like appendage that crashed down where Marcus had been, sending shockwaves through the ground. If that had landed, it would have ended him. Marcus moved. His brain processed a dozen things at once, the timing of Vorkar's transformations, the split-second openings, the shifting gaps between armor plates. He had to find a weakness. Fast. Vorkar lunged again. Marcus baited him this time, sidestepping at the last second, forcing the Slurgeon's weight forward. In that moment of imbalance, Marcus struck. A full-force punch, straight to the side of Vorkar's knee. The alien's plating buckled. A hiss of steam erupted from the joint. A weakness. Marcus didn't hesitate. He moved inside Vorkar's range, targeting the same spot. 3 quick strikes, each blow landing with precision, each one widening the damage. Vorkar stumbled. The crowd screamed. And for the first time, Marcus saw it. A flicker of emotion in the Slurgeon's glowing eyes. Doubt. He pressed forward. Ruthless. Unrelenting. A hook to the side of the head. A sharp elbow strike to the jaw. A lightning-fast uppercut to the throat. Vorkar reeled, his mechanical plates unable to shift fast enough to compensate. And then, Marcus finished it. A full-force spinning heel kick, aimed directly at the already damaged knee. Crack. The joint snapped inward. Vorkar collapsed. The arena went still. Marcus stepped back, breathing hard. His knuckles were bloody from striking the armored warrior. His ribs ached. But he was still standing. And Vorkar wasn't. Silence. Then the Colosseum erupted. The roar was unreal. The human had done the impossible. Again. Marcus sat on the bench, wrapping his knuckles with a strip of cloth. His body ached, but he didn't care. He had fought worse before. A shadow fell over him. He looked up. It was the Carivian again. The same one who had warned him before. This time, its 4 glowing eyes studied him with open curiosity. "You continue to surprise them, human," it said, voice smooth. "But you understand what this means, don't you?" Marcus smirked. "Yeah. The next fight. It wasn't going to be fair." The Carivian smiled. "They are afraid of you now. They will do anything to stop you." Marcus just flexed his fingers, rolling his shoulders. "Good. Let them try." The Xiphos Prime Colosseum was alive. The roar of the crowd pulsed like a living thing, shaking the walls, sending tremors through the obsidian floor. Millions of voices, from thousands of different species, had fused into one sound, pure, raw exhilaration. The tournament had begun as just another spectacle of violence. Another display of the galaxy's mightiest warriors clashing for dominance. Another predictable contest between titans. But now they weren't just watching a tournament. They were watching a legend in the making. Marcus Hayes, the lone human, had broken the championship. He had defied every expectation, shattered every assumption about his species, and crushed some of the most feared fighters in the galaxy. With nothing. No weapons. No armor. Just his hands. And now, the final fight awaited. Marcus sat alone in the waiting tunnel, rapping his knuckles. His body ached, but pain didn't matter. He had fought through worse. He had marched across battlefields, survived orbital drops, crawled through trenches filled with fire and screaming and death. This was just another battlefield. His opponent hadn't been announced yet. But he already knew. They weren't going to play fair. They couldn't. Because if a human won the Galactic Combat Championship, it would change everything. The other species had dismissed humanity as weak for decades. But now, if Marcus proved them wrong, the consequences would ripple across the galaxy. No empire, no council, no warrior species could afford to let that happen. So they were going to send their monster. Their failsafe. Their executioner. Torok the Immortal. The holodisplay flickered. Marcus barely reacted when the name appeared. He had been expecting it. The moment the crowd saw the matchup, the Colosseum erupted. Some cheered. Some gasped. Some screamed. Torok wasn't just a fighter. He was a nightmare. The reigning champion. The undefeated warlord. A genetic experiment created by the ruling elite of the Rethari Dominion, designed purely for war. His body was a fusion of biology and technology. Muscles enhanced with artificial fiber weave, bones laced with reinforced alloys, reflexes accelerated by combat implants. He stood over 10 feet tall, an apex predator carved from living steel. He was a living weapon. And the council had allowed him to enter. Because he wasn't carrying a weapon. He was one. Marcus stepped onto the battlefield, rolling his shoulders, exhaling slowly. The pain in his ribs was sharp. His knuckles burned. His muscles screamed for rest. But there was no time for that. Across the arena, Torok stood, unmoving. His glowing red eyes locked onto Marcus with machine-like precision. His breathing was slow. Calculated. The crowd hushed. This wasn't like the other fights. This wasn't just another match. This was a war. The announcer's voice boomed. "Begin." Torok moved. And Marcus barely had time to react. The Colosseum blurred as Torok closed the distance in a single bound, faster than anything that size had a right to move. A fist like a wrecking ball came crashing toward Marcus' skull. Instinct saved him. Marcus threw himself sideways, rolling just as Torok's strike obliterated the ground where he had been standing. Boom. A crater. Torok didn't pause. Marcus barely had time to get his feet under him before the next attack came, a spinning backhand that cut through the air like a missile. Marcus ducked. The wind pressure alone sent him skidding backward. Shit. This was different. Torok wasn't just strong. He wasn't just fast. He was perfect. No wasted movements. No hesitation. No openings. Every single attack was designed to kill. Marcus had fought tough opponents before. He had beaten warriors twice his size, dropped monsters with nothing but his fists. But this was something else. And in that moment, as Torok advanced, unyielding, unstoppable, Marcus realized something. He couldn't outfight this thing. Torok was too fast, too precise, too engineered. Marcus had always been good at finding weaknesses, at picking apart opponents, targeting vulnerabilities. But Torok didn't have any. Because he wasn't just a fighter. He was a goddamn weapon. And weapons only had one weakness: the person using them. Torok attacked again, another devastating, bone-crushing strike. Marcus didn't dodge. Instead, he stepped inside the attack. Torok's fist missed by inches as Marcus moved closer, into his blind spot. The champion hesitated, for the briefest fraction of a second. And that was all Marcus needed. He struck. A full-force elbow to the base of Torok's skull. The impact made the massive warrior stumble. Another strike. A knee to the ribs. Torok grunted, the first sound of pain. Marcus pushed harder. He couldn't overpower Torok. He couldn't outmatch his strength, his speed, his sheer brutality. But he could outfight him. He could make him react. Think. And that was the weakness. Because thinking meant hesitation. And hesitation meant death. The fight became a blur. Torok attacked. Marcus dodged, weaved, slipped past every strike by millimeters. He baited attacks that would leave Torok open. Exploited every split-second reaction. Every instinct. Marcus didn't fight harder. He fought smarter. And slowly, inevitably, he started breaking the champion. A counterstrike to the ribs. A sharp blow to the knee joint. A precise shot to the throat. Torok staggered. For the first time in the tournament, he looked uncertain. Marcus knew he had one shot. One moment to end this. He saw the opening. Torok lunged, throwing his full weight forward, desperate now, angry, afraid. And Marcus met him head-on. A full-force punch. Straight to the temple. Crack. Torok's head snapped to the side. The massive warrior's body wavered. Then he collapsed. Face first. Unmoving. The silence was absolute. Then, a sound. A single, stunned voice. Then another. Then another. Then the entire Colosseum erupted. The crowd lost their minds. A human had won. Not just a fight. Not just a battle. The entire goddamn championship. Marcus stood over the fallen champion, breathing hard, body screaming. Blood dripped from his knuckles. His arms felt like lead. But he didn't fall. He just stood there, staring at the roaring crowd. The impossible had happened. A human had conquered the Galactic Combat Championship. And the galaxy. It would never be the same.